In 539 BC, the most powerful man in the world did something no conqueror had ever done before. He freed his slaves. He wasn't obligated to. There was nobody who could force him. He had just conquered the greatest empire in the world without barely firing an arrow. Babylon, the most powerful city on earth, with its 90-meter walls, its hanging gardens, its golden temples, had fallen into his hands practically without resistance. He could do whatever he wanted. And what he did was write a document, a clay cylinder 23 centimeters long, covered in cuneiform writing, which declared that all peoples of his empire had the right to practice their own religion, speak their own language, and live according to their own customs. That slaves brought to Babylon from conquered lands would be freed and could return home. That no inhabitant of his empire would be forced to serve against their will. That clay cylinder, the Cyrus Cylinder, is today in the British Museum in London, and it is considered by many historians the first human rights document in history, written 2,100 years before the Magna Carta, 2,300 years before the American Declaration of Independence, by a Persian king named Cyrus II, who history calls Cyrus the Great. But who was this man really? How did a shepherd from a peripheral region of the ancient world become the founder of the greatest empire that had existed until then? And why, in a world where conquerors were celebrated for their cruelty, did Cyrus choose clemency? To understand Cyrus, we need to understand the world he was born into. The 6th century BC was a world of empires collapsing and rising. Assyria, which had dominated the Middle East for centuries with legendary cruelty, had collapsed in 612 BC when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh, its capital. In the vacuum left by Assyria, 3 powers competed for dominance: Babylon, controlling Mesopotamia and the Levant; Egypt, controlling North Africa and sometimes Canaan; and Media, an Iranian kingdom that had been the main ally in the destruction of Assyria and now controlled a vast territory on the Iranian plateau. It was in this context, in a vassal kingdom of Media called Anshan, in southwestern modern Iran, that Cyrus was born around 600 BC, son of a minor local king, grandson, on his mother's side, of the king of Media himself, a position that could have guaranteed a comfortable and irrelevant life. But Cyrus had another vision. The first great turning point in Cyrus's life was a rebellion. In 553 BC, Cyrus rebelled against his maternal grandfather, Astyages, king of Media. It was an act of extraordinary audacity. Media was far more powerful than Anshan. The Median armies had destroyed Assyria. Nobody expected a peripheral vassal king to challenge them, but Cyrus had something that strategy books rarely mention as a military advantage. He knew how to treat people. When the Median armies marched against him, part of them deserted and joined Cyrus, not out of fear, not out of bribery, because Cyrus had a reputation for treating his soldiers with respect, for dividing spoils fairly, for never sacrificing men unnecessarily. In 550 BC, 3 years after starting the rebellion, Cyrus captured Astyages, and here is the first sign that this man was different. Instead of executing his grandfather, as was the custom when a rival was captured, Cyrus spared him. He allowed him to live out his remaining days at the Persian court with honor. The ancient world was astonished. Clemency was not a virtue conquerors demonstrated. It was seen as weakness. Cyrus was showing that he saw things differently. With Media absorbed, Cyrus now had a considerable empire. But he looked west, where Lydia, in western modern Turkey, was governed by the famous Croesus. Croesus was legendary for his wealth. The expression "rich as Croesus" still exists in several European languages. He was the richest king in the known Western world, and he had consulted the Oracle of Delphi about whether he should attack Cyrus. The oracle replied that if he crossed the Halys River, the natural border between the two empires, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus interpreted this as a good omen. He crossed the river. What the oracle had not said, and which became clear afterward, was which great empire would be destroyed. In 547 BC, Cyrus defeated Croesus and captured Sardis, the capital of Lydia. Croesus was captured, and Cyrus once again, surprised the world. Instead of executing Croesus, he treated him as a guest of honor. Greek sources say the two became friends, that Croesus became an advisor to Cyrus. The pattern was established. Cyrus didn't destroy defeated enemies. He absorbed them. In 539 BC came the most extraordinary moment: Babylon, the most famous city of the ancient world, with its 90-meter walls considered impenetrable, with the Temple of Marduk, the most important religious center in Mesopotamia, with its hanging gardens, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The king of Babylon was Nabonidus, an unpopular ruler who had offended the priests of Marduk by neglecting the traditional cult, who spent months away from Babylon on archaeological expeditions in the desert because he had an unusual passion for antiquities. The population of Babylon was dissatisfied. When the armies of Cyrus arrived at the gates of the city, something extraordinary happened. The gates were opened, no battle, no sacking, no destruction. The priests of Marduk, who had been furious with Nabonidus, opened the gates to Cyrus, and Cyrus entered Babylon not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Babylonian records, the Nabonidus Chronicles, describe Cyrus's entry with extraordinary detail. They say Cyrus ordered his soldiers not to sack the city, to respect the temples, to treat the citizens with courtesy. And then, days after the conquest, Cyrus did something the world had never seen. He had the Cyrus Cylinder inscribed, the document that declared all peoples of the empire had the right to practice their religion. That the Jews, who had been deported to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar decades before, could return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This decision is recorded not only in the Cyrus Cylinder, but also in the Hebrew Bible. In the book of Ezra, Cyrus is described as God's instrument for liberating the Jewish people. It is the only time in the Bible that a non-Jewish ruler is called anointed of God, Mashiach in Hebrew, the same word that in Greek becomes Messiah. Cyrus the Great, a Persian king worshipper of Ahura Mazda, is called Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. The founder of the greatest empire of the ancient world died on military campaign in 530 BC, fighting tribes on the steppes of Central Asia. His son Cambyses II continued the expansion, conquering Egypt, and his successor Darius I expanded the empire to its maximum extent, from Egypt to India, from Greece to the steppes of Central Asia. The greatest empire the world had seen until then, built on a principle that Cyrus had established: you can conquer a people by force, but you can only govern them through respect. In the next episode, a young Macedonian of 20 will inherit a kingdom and decide the entire world is not enough. Alexander the Great. Next episode.